Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your Sweep Union, and in this one there are numerous advances in favor of the Russians with a single advance in favor of the Ukrainians. The fighting is taking place on the northern parts of the Donetsk region in the close vicinity to Leman as the Russians continue offensive operations towards the city from the northwestern direction. For the north of Pocrosk, the Russians continued offensive operations to contain the Ukrainian counterattack and to counter-encircle the Ukrainian forces, while the Ukrainians are working on freeing up their forces that were counter-encircled in the western parts, regaining control over the settlement in that vicinity. The Russians continue offensive operations within the Dnipropetrovsk and Separatia region along the first and second lines of defense. Starting out in the northern section of the front line, the Russians have managed to gain control over the forest patch area east of Derilove, securing the supply lines between the Russian forces working in the direction of Gludyasy in the east with Derilove in the west, as the Russians have some roads that go between Gludyasy all the way towards Derilove. This better connects the Russian forces in the eastern direction with the ones in the western direction and secures the flank to the south of the offensive operations taking place in Novoselivka, which seems to be the area the Russians are currently focusing on. Gaining control over which cuts off an additional supply route of the Ukrainian forces towards Leman from the northwestern direction and leads to the forest patch area, which can cut off the final supply route to the northwestern direction. Moving on to the north of Pokrovsk, the Russians managed to gain control over the fortified positions to the north of Penkivka. Regaining control over these positions secures the northern flank of the Russian supply lines going up towards Kosherev Yar. At the same time, the Russians have recently been advancing west of Shahov, which leads to the offensive operations on the western flank of the river line, securing the supply lines of their own forces, while attempting to cut off the supply lines to the Ukrainian forces operating within Novotoretsk. At the same time, the Ukrainians managed to recapture Novoshakhova here in the western direction. This allows the Ukrainians to counterattack in the vicinity of Doroshne, where geolocated footage actually shows Ukrainian forces on the rear of Doroshne. However, based on this footage, we can see that the counterattack took place from the north, from the Novoshakova-Ivanivka direction. It included a couple of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and some troop transports, where the Ukrainians were counterattacking to regain control over the area, but heavy Russian drone fire managed to disable the vehicles, and fighting takes place in the area, leaving the Doroshne direction in a gray zone, not just the settlement itself, but the near vicinity of it. The Ukrainians are here working heavily on regaining control of the area to secure their supply lines to their forces within Nikonorivka and the general western direction here, to secure their flank for their counterattack operations, to push in the direction of Boykivka and cutting off the supply line of the Russian forces in the direction of Kosherev Yar in the north. As for the south, the Russians managed to secure the first patch area here to the south, here to the northwest of Sachishok, where the Russians will be working on cutting off the remaining Ukrainian positions within Nikonorivka and the surrounding areas to not just cut off the supply lines to their forces, but also to destroy the Ukrainian grouping of forces and free up their supply line to the north in the direction of Kosherev Yar. We see heavy fighting has returned to this section of the front line as both sides look to outmaneuver the other side and to encircle their opposing forces. In the western direction, the Russians have managed to advance to the west and south of Verbova, securing parts of the forest lines in the area. No significant advances, likely just a correction from the previous reports of the Russian capture of Verbova. Didn't just capture the settlement, but some of the surrounding areas as well. And fighting continues along the second line of defense here in the Dnipropetrovsk region. As for the first line of defense, the Russians have managed to secure the positions and first lines here west of Novoivanivka, to the south of Ryhoroivka, where the Russians continue offensive operations to gain full control over the eastern bank of the Yanchur River here in the northeastern parts of the first line of defense. To the southeast of this, the Russian forces continue gaining control over the first lines here to the east of Poltavka, where they managed to gain control over the first lines here to the southwest of Olhivske on the near vicinity of the residential area east of the Yanchur River of the town of Poltavka, while also gaining control over some additional forest lines here to the southeast as well. The Russians are approaching Poltavka from the southern, southeastern, and eastern flanks. This is also expanding in the northeastern direction as well. Russians are working on gaining control of Poltavka, which will gain them control over the southern parts of the first line of defense here in the Separatia region. They allow them to concentrate their forces in the northern flank in the direction of Novomykolaievka, Novovasilivka, and the general settlements along the Yanchur River. The Russians continued offensive operations all across the front line, centered around the first and second lines of defense within the Separatia and Dnipropetrovsk region, the vicinity of Pocrosk, the flanks of the cities, not just Pokrovsk but Milnorad as well as the Leman and Siversk direction, where heavy fighting is taking place all across these sectors of the front lines. But there's also additional fighting within the Kharkiv region, where the Russians have encroached on the border area from several sectors, claiming to create a buffer zone along the border section, but with significant advances on the eastern parts along the Uskut River line. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you for watching and have a great day.